It's Thursday, it's 8 o'clock, and it's the Big Detecting Show. Good evening, Adrian.
Evening, Dave. How are you?
You well? I'm all right.
Yeah,
bit warm
sorry.
In the studio. Bit warm in the studio tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because we've got Britain's Got Talent rehearsal after us. So
they've upped
I
the
bumped
obvious.
into, I nearly said a name then, but they're dead.
Simon Cowell.
No, I nearly said.
Oh no, he died years ago, didn't he?
Yeah. Sorry, I was a bit late tonight, so we haven't spoken. Sorry.
We haven't. But puppy love and all that malarkey.
Badger hell, yeah. Badger decided to go mental just before my wife got home. So
have you renamed it officially now?
It does look like a badger, and it acts like a badger because it attacks me a lot. But no, it's doing all right. But it's like having a child.
Put the badger mask on him.
I don't know where the badger mask has gone.
Staple it to his. No, sorry, you can't do that.
No, glue it. If anyone's wife wants another child, just get a puppy. It'll put you off.
Hey,
late night.
Let's bring tonight. We've got a guest coming on briefly. Our main guest will be on shortly, but we've got a guest coming on briefly with some very exciting news, Adrian.
Yes. Yes.
Look at him. Look at him now with his cup. Let's get me cup ready. Look at him. Get me cup ready so everyone can see me cup.
Mr. Gary Cook.
Good evening, Mr. Cook. How are you?
Hello. How are you doing?
You all right, Gary?
Marvellous.
Yeah, fine. Let me just adjust myself because I want to try and make myself not look. I always look fat when I come on your show. It must be the cameras.
That means you've got to stop coming on.
Last time
they say the camera adds £10. I reckon I must have about 15 cameras on me.
Have you got your pajamas on tonight, Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My pajama bottoms I have, yeah.
Yeah. No rummaging around tonight.
My Homer pants, because I put on so much weight, I can't sit around in jeans or anything like that.
Well, anyway, Gary, you've come on because you've got some. It was originally one bit of news, but it's now sort of like progressed to some even better news, hasn't it?
Well, originally you were going to have me on for a bit just to talk about tickets going on sale for the rally and everything, which they have, and what we got planned and everything for this year. But if I got a couple of minutes, I can say that. But like me and Adrian Adrian's been working ridiculously hard on getting the new online booking system up and running. He built the website, as you know, for us. Bless his heart. I love him to bits. And he's also taken the pressure off Lisa this year with the online booking system. And well, Adrian, what can we say really?
Well, I think originally Gary was a bit concerned because he was worried people preferred to phone up, post a check, get a letter, fax or whatever. And it's your fault, really, Gary, and all the Rodney Cook team, because it's such a good event that it's done very well, hasn't it? I don't know if you want to say how many tickets you've sold in the last 48 hours.
When we first set up, we did a pre-sale for anyone who came to previous rallies and on our mailing list. So that went out, and when Adrian hit the enter button to go on sale, I think we did 50 tickets in under 2 minutes. I think it was, and we've literally went yesterday at 1:00. We went on open sale, and we've sold over 800 weekend tickets in 48 hours.
Fantastic.
Which is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I can't believe how many tickets we've sold in such a short space of time. And all I can say is what an amazing support all of you lot out there in Detector Land have shown for the rally. And it's grown, like I've said to you many times, guys. It's grown so much over the last few years. And I think this was the icing on the cake. I couldn't have believed, even Adrian was just every couple of minutes, he was sending me a screenshot going with like, oh my God.
Yeah, fortunately, there were a few technical glitches, like a couple of options people selected, but touch wood, the software worked. And I think Rob Random's put, he's shocked the booking system worked with no issues. Shocking. It's going to be a great event again this year, and the money, more importantly, goes to charity.
Yeah.
So where are we at then, Gary? You've sold X amount, and are there more becoming available?
We've got at the moment roughly about 100 weekend tickets left to sell, and the way things are going, if me and you had a conversation this time tomorrow, we'd probably be saying we're sold out. They're just going ridiculous. So there's just around about 100 of weekender tickets available. There's plenty of one-day tickets available. You can still get a ticket for the Saturday or the Sunday. There's quite a few of those left. But as I say, if you want to come to the weekend, I really would. And this isn't the salesman's talk now. This is, I would really get going, get on the system and place an order because they're going to go.
Remind us what date it is, Gary. And
it's
am I right
Friday.
in saying it's the Marlborough area?
Yeah. We're back on I'm quite happily. We're back on the same estate as we were last year. We've had a fantastic estate owner who has allowed us. Well, he actually invited us to come back, and I was a little bit worried when he first said it because I thought, well, will people want to go back on the same fields? But then he pulled out something out of his hat with 500 acres of land that we never went on last year. So he said, I've actually got 500 acres of land on the estate that you can use, as well as the last year's field. So I thought, well, anyone who came last year knew that it was a fantastic event, and there's some great finds made. So just the opportunity to go back there with the extra land was something I couldn't really turn down. And I sort of spoke on behalf of all the guys and girls who attend the rally, and thought, well, if I was a detectorist and I was given an opportunity to go back to that estate with some fresh land that we hadn't used before, given what had come up off the last time, you'd be mad not to do it, really. And I think, that might have had a part to play in the fact why we've been so busy on the bookings.
Can I request a Vodafone mast be put up in the valley, please?
Yeah, right.
Gary, just one quick question. Is there going to be showers?
Yes.
Right. And is that part of the ticket, or do people...
The shower block will be back, and it's all part of the ticket. When you've paid your 60 quid, that includes the booking fee, it includes your camping, it includes the shower block, it includes all the entertainment. We're going to hopefully have a comedian on the Friday night this year.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
Not me.
So we'll have. I won't put you all through my quiz again, like I did last year.
Is the shower water recycled? And if so, can I go before Rob Random?
You can go before if you want, mate.
Cheers.
Yeah. No, it comes from a proper water source, so you'll be all right. So the ticket includes all of that, all the entertainment, and the one thing we are doing again this year, it's very, very popular, but we're going to do it a little bit more regimented this year, is bringing back the gaiters, and we're bringing back the beater box with the seats in it. And we will have designated bus stops all around the site. So basically, we'll have a gator route as opposed to a bus route. And on each stop will be a map. And it was obviously you are here. And it will show on the map all the way around the estate where the bus stops are. Adrian's going to design a QR code for people who can read the QR code. Aren't you, Aid?
I did mention it, but I'll do that. Yeah. So you scan on your phone and it puts your location on Google Maps. Because some people, Gary, were drinking at the rally. I didn't have anything. So I had no problems.
I got no voicemails at all off anybody.
What we'll do is get yourself one of those mini Wi-Fi blocks that we use. You go to Curry's and they're $49.99, and they give you a hotspot Wi-Fi, and they're fantastic. We ran all our phones off of them in the marquee, and we ran the payment card machine, and everything was running off of it. And they work absolutely fantastic. But so we're going to have the bus stops so that people can go onto the fields.
Sorry, Gary, I've got the makeup lady saying our guest is nearly ready to come on. Sorry, not chasing you, but it's all right. They're just gone to the toilet. So
that's all right. Yeah. So you'll get a bus stop, so you can have trips to and back from the field, and they'll be running. So gators will be going in designated stops, not random, so people can stop at a stop, and then hopefully the way it will work is one will be going around every 10-15 minutes. So you're taking you to and from the fields. And it can take you to different parts of the estate as well. So if you want to go to field 10, just get on the bus stop and then just go around the route until you get to field.
Well, listen, Gary, it's magnificent news. I know you've already raised a magnificent total, which I would suggest would make the last total look quite insignificant in comparison at the end of the weekend and the end of the events. So tell us finally where anybody who does want to come and who hasn't got a ticket yet, where they can get that from.
Yeah, all they got to do is go to the Rodney Cook website, which is www.rodneycookmemorial.co.uk. And on the homepage will actually be a great big button, or click the button. It says book your tickets here. And it would directly take you to the booking system. And then you just choose whether you want to come to the one-day event or the weekend event. And as I said earlier on, if you want a weekender ticket, you really do need to get your in gear, because they are literally going to be gone by the, like, pretty much guarantee that by Saturday they will probably be sold out of weekender tickets. And we got
go there quick, one and all, get them sorted.
Can I just say a quick
certainly.
thank you to Spinks Auctioneers and to Michael, the finder of the very rare Henry III gold coin, because Spinks did I'm not really too sure what they call it, but it was they were selling the rights to something to do with the coin, and it raised £15,000. And Michael decided that his half of that he wanted to go to the Rodney Cook to give to cancer charity. So brilliant. I just want to say a huge thank you, because between him and Spinks, that's £7,500 they've donated to us to go to the cancer charities, and what an amazing gesture. So yeah.
Excellent.
Right. Thanks, Gary. Our guest is just about to come on.
Yes,
Perfect.
Gary, thank you for
everything,
and I will speak to you in the next day or two when I actually sit down for 5 minutes. You take care, young man.
Speak to you later, and I'll speak to you tomorrow, mate. Take care, everyone.
Regards to Lisa. Good night.
Thanks for all your support again, guys and girls. It's fantastic.
Anytime, pal.
Love you all. Bye.
He loves us, apparently. I wonder if he means that, like, loves us or loves us.
He said guys and girls. He didn't say gender neutral, which 0.7% of the Rodney Cook visitors are. I can tell you.
Hey,
I've got the stats here.
Moving on. We've got a fantastic guest tonight. One you've been looking forward to. Well, I've been looking forward to speaking to him properly for years. And I've never got round to it. And I thought, I've got to ask Chris. I've not spoken to him in a while. Ask Chris. So, Doctor, we have a doctor, Christopher.
In the house.
He's very young and very good looking. Good evening, Christopher Monk. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thanks. Nice to see you both.
Hi,
and yourself. Was the introduction all right? And
not bad.
Is the money in the post?
It doesn't. I don't get those introductions very often, so that's pretty cool. That.
Well, welcome to the Big Detecting Show. Obviously, me and you have been in communication for a number of years now.
Yes.
I know some of your background, obviously.
Okay.
So would you like to introduce yourself for the viewers, if you would?
Right. Okay. You want me to tell everybody what I do?
Who you are, what you do.
You don't want my family background and anything like that?
If you want, you can give us your bank codes, anything you want.
Right. Basically, in terms of what I do with medieval stuff, I work for myself. I used to teach at the University of Manchester. I was quite late into all of that higher education stuff. I was in my mid-30s when I started, and then I just kept on being this perpetual student, and eventually ended up doing a PhD. And then I lectured for a few years at the same university, partly while I was finishing off my PhD, and then carried on for a couple of years after that. And then I set up a business, which is a consultancy business. So I help people professionals in the heritage sector and what we now call creatives. So anyone from a TV producer down to a musician or a video creator. And if they're interested in developing some kind of story that has a medieval angle to it, then I'll help them with that. And I'll help them. Either I can help them immediately, or I'll do the research that's necessary. So that's kind of my job. But in terms of projects that I'm doing at the moment, I've become quite interested in food history, medieval food history. So I've been doing a lot of work on that. So maybe one or two of your audience might actually know me from that background, that I'm somebody that's into food history. And then the other stuff that I've kind of doing quite a lot of work on is related to work that I do at Rochester Cathedral. And that's mostly to do with a particular manuscript that they have there, which is a really important one, and it has a collection of pre-conquest laws in it. And so from over the last few years, on and off, I've been working for them as a consultant and helping them translate some of the texts and that kind of stuff. So that's me. Broadly speaking, I'm a you probably technically wouldn't call me a historian because I didn't do my research in the history department. I did it in the English department. I'm really kind of a cross interdisciplinary kind of guy, you know. That's what I don't specialize in history, but I do work with historical texts. I tended to teach a lot of literary texts when I was at university, when I was teaching, but also stuff to do with some manuscript artwork as well. Narrative artwork is kind of what I'm known for doing. So the stuff that I've published has always had a visual element to it as well as a textual element to it. So that's what I'm known for doing. So I kind of mix it up a little bit. So you could call me a cultural historian if you wanted to label me, and you can call me a food historian, but I'm technically speaking not a normal, ordinary historian. So I'm just making it.
It's okay. We don't label people. They label me and Adrian.
Yeah. Normally in public toilets on the wall. Chris, what the food, the medieval food?
Yeah.
That to me is really interesting, and
Good.
more so to Dave, because especially if you got any cake recipes. But how did you suddenly? Because when I read about it on your website, which is the medieval.
Hold on. I've got it all set up.
I started reading into it, and I thought, I've never seen this before, you know. And some of the dishes and stuff. And I thought, oh, what a great idea. How long have you been doing that? Or what made you suddenly think, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to look into this.
Actually, it was about 3 years ago. I wasn't keeping too well. And so I was just sort of flicking through, I'm using a book analogy. I was looking through website articles, looking for things that might just be easy to look at and read and nothing too deep and heavy. And I was looking at Manchester University's website because of my own link, and I was looking at their John Rylands Library special collections, and I came across this particular book that they have from Richard II's period. So they've got a book that dates to about 1390. It's a little book, and they'd had it digitized, and it's full of recipes that were produced by Richard II's master cooks. And I was a bit surprised in some ways that I found it very easy to read straight from the manuscript, partly because I hadn't up to that point dealt with a lot of later manuscripts. I dealt more with early Anglo-Saxon manuscripts. So I found this quite engaging. I thought, I can tell what they're asking me to do and how to make things and stuff. So I thought, well, I've always had an interest in food, and I even have an O-level in cookery, so I can claim some kind of.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, I can claim some kind of, not really expertise, but some background. And I've since then I've always enjoyed cooking and baking, and I've been a bit experimental. And I thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity to perhaps gently get back into doing some work. And then my health improved, and I've been able to kind of focus more on it the last year or so. And so that's the link really comes from having a childhood interest in food and cooking, and then developing professionally with manuscripts and stuff like that. And so the two seem to just naturally come together in a way, really.
Do you know, I was thinking about it today. It's a form of experimental archaeology.
It is.
Bringing things, like recreating the standing stones, for instance. It's bringing that period of history back to modern day, and I'm sure you've been able to redefine the recipe to suit a modern day standard.
I think what's interesting is I'm somebody that in my short academic career, because it's not been that long that I've been doing this really, but I'm someone that's engaged with texts, and in my consultancy work translating texts, so that side of it kind of comes quite naturally. But when you take a closer look at these recipes, you realize how they're actually really difficult to interpret, because often the information's not that forthcoming, and there are no measurements, or you rarely get measurements in this period, the 14th century or the 15th century. And so you're having to interpret things, and you often find you get false friends with words. So you think you know what something means, and then you find out it doesn't mean that, and you've got to do loads of extra research. And then there's the whole thing of, well, I don't just want to translate this, I want to do it. I want to try and cook these things. And that's when you start doing the experimental archaeology, if you want to put it like that, and you end up making loads of really terrible food initially, and then it gets better.
I was going to ask that. Are there any dishes that sounded so bizarre and you thought, I don't know why I'm making this, and then when you'd done it, actually it was nice?
The one that comes to mind is a dish that's it's kind of well known amongst people that know a little bit about food history. So there's a dish called I can remember how to pronounce it now. Mormonay. I mean, it's got lots of different spellings, and it's also related to a dish called blancmange or blancmange, which people have heard of, or some people have heard of. And obviously, we've got the word and the dish blancmange today, which is totally different. But these kind of dishes are they kind of derive historically from Arabic dishes, and they involved rice or ground rice and cooking that in some kind of stock, and then using ground chicken or ground capon, and then adding sugar as well. And the Arabic recipes are more specific about the quantities, and they're using a lot of sugar. So you think ground rice, poultry flesh, and sugar is going to be revolting.
Oh.
And one of
it turned me.
One of the recipes didn't have. They're quite similar recipes, and one of them didn't have the chicken in, and one of them did. And I thought I was only going to like, or perhaps tolerate, the one without the chicken. But actually, I preferred the one with the chicken. It was a weird thing coming across this mix of savoury and sweet, and actually, I really enjoyed it, and I much preferred the dish that had the chicken in it. So chicken and sugar do go together if they're combined with ground rice.
Do you mind me asking, do you have a partner, Chris?
I do, yeah.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't. No.
I'd love to see their lunchbox.
They don't get anything.
Yeah, sort of. So those sort of dishes, do you still cook them now? Experiment with them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm basically with the recipe side of it. I set up a different website, Monk's Modern Medieval Cuisine, and then I started doing a YouTube channel about just over a year ago, and there's about 12 or 13, 14 recipes on there that I've taken to the stage where I feel comfortable in putting them out there. and then on what I'm doing is it's not easy to fit it all into my schedule, but I am trying once a month to produce a new recipe. And sometimes, there I am, look, he's found me. And so at the moment, the next recipe is actually going to be gruel. So I'm going to do something on gruel, but it's posh gruel, because you have to bear in mind this is Richard II's household that the recipes are for. He doesn't necessarily eat all of them, but even gruel has saffron in it, that kind of thing. So I'm doing something that's called it's called gruel forced in the form of curry. This is the Richard's recipe, and then a bit later on there's another version of it called gruel enforced. So it literally means a sort of enforced or strengthened gruel, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And I am this time going to flip over into a fusion recipe. So I'm going to use the medieval recipe for doing the gruel, and then I'm going to do something that's a bit more modern to serve with it. But I'm going to try and not use ingredients in the modern one that you wouldn't find in the medieval period in England. So I'm going to be doing something I think is quite tasty. I have done an initial experiment, but it was a while ago, and I've been meaning to get this sort of like brought up to a level where it won't, induce vomiting. So.
Wow, I've got exactly the same rolling pin as you have.
There you go. I've got 2 of those actually.
I've got
I just like
group
I just
One
making
for
me
each
think.
hand.
Kerry Fuller, one of our good friends, and she's the producer of the Lost Tapes of History. The first episode of season 1, I actually played a chef opposite Lambert Simnel. So that's that sort of time period, isn't it? So, you know, any of your things, I might have actually baked. I don't know.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that will, I mean, I've got 194 recipes to work my way through,
Wow.
and in form of curry, and also I go outside of that because I do use some Anglo-Norman earlier recipes that go back, some of them to the 13th century. So, and then I'll move into the 15th century as well. I mean, one of the things I'm going to be posting an experimental recipe, as well as the YouTube channel. I'll do a blog now and again about an experiment that I'm working on, and this worked out really quite a simple dish to do. So I think tomorrow, hopefully, it'll be up, and it's something nice and sweet that you can have with your coffee. I know that coffee is not medieval, but and it's basically a toffee, really, a slice of honey and sugar based toffee, and it's very hard. It's a bit like peanut brittle, but it's got pine nuts in instead of peanuts. So that'll be appearing tomorrow, and there'll be a recipe on there. And it is, I think, quite easy to do as long as you're not scared about burning yourself when you're boiling up the sugar and the honey.
One of our viewers, he's just asked a question which is quite fitting. Keith Ellis, did medieval people make Christmas cake? And if so, was it similar?
No, they didn't make Christmas cake. They didn't really make cakes back then. They hadn't developed the techniques that we now use, like when you're making your Victoria sandwich. They did have sweet things, and they did make something that's quite like mince pies today. Sorry, go on.
Just run me through a normal sort of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, did they have breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
Well, if you were really, I mean, if we stick, say, to the 14th century, if you were of the upper echelons, right, and nobility and maybe royalty, you may have had breakfast. If you were working in the fields, you may have had breakfast, but you wouldn't have had it straight away because you may have been, up and about doing your work, and then a few hours into your work, you might have some bread, or maybe if you're feeling, if you've got some cheese as well. And the reason we know that, there's a record of somebody that was in a bad accident where his job was digging a big hole, and he was sitting in the bottom of the hole eating his breakfast, and it caved in on him. So there are records like that you can establish that people did have breakfast, but generally breakfast was it kind of had connotations of I don't know, not quite licentiousness, but you were viewed as it could gain you a bad reputation if you wanted those niceties of breakfast, unless you were of the very upper classes, or perhaps if you were a child as well. And certainly in monasteries, there's a long-standing tradition in Benedictine monasteries of the young kids that were basically trainee monks being allowed to have bread and a drink, and they would call that, I'm trying to remember what the term is now. I did a post, actually. There's a YouTube post. You can look at it. It's about In Search of Medieval Breakfast or something like that.
Is that what my mum used to give me when I was a kid, and they called it pobs or pods or like that?
Well, I don't know. They called it
bread in milk or something.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to be initially that all it was bread and a drink, and then it developed. So things like cheese might be added, and they seem to even at one stage eat eggs or eggs in a soup. And it would only be the young kiddies, the young children, so they're not full monks. And you could be as young as 7 when you're in a monastery. So
wow.
They were allowed to have something, and also it was one of the other things that perhaps is important to point out is you can't really accurately map on our way of eating, breakfast, lunch, dinner, onto the medieval period. So even though we say that people didn't have, generally speaking, wouldn't have had breakfast unless they're of either young or maybe, I think King Richard's grandfather, Edward the Third, isn't it? Yeah. He there's some record of him taking into his employ a breakfast cook, a cook just for breakfast. So that's quite interesting. So he was into it.
Was it Edward the Fourth?
Edward the Third, isn't it? Am I right?
No, it's Edward the Fourth. Was his dad Edward the?
It's his great granddad.
Oh, his grand. Right, where are we? So we're at Richard the Third.
Richard the Second.
Richard the Second. Oh, right, Richard the Second. Edward the Third was his father. Edward the Second was his grandfather.
It says Edward the Second then. Sorry about that.
Look at that.
I think it was his grandfather that did it. So it'd be around about 1330s or something like that when he was
1307 to 1327.
Right. So I think it's him. I might be wrong. It could have been his dad, but I think it's his grandfather that has. Oh, maybe it was his father. I'll have to go back and check. But the other thing I was going to say is that basically when you did have your main meal of the day, it seemed to fall in late morning anyway. So you probably only got to wait till 10 or 11 o'clock. But that's still quite a few hours if you started working, in whatever
that's
you're doing.
Second breakfast for us hobbits.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, I suppose unlike today, we our phones and that wake us up for work at 7, half 6 in the morning. Then in the summer they'd get up at probably
That's the
5.
middle of the day, that mate.
Yeah. Well, for you it is, Dave, for doing a real job. But it's interesting that the days were probably longer. So
So and if you were if you worked in the kitchen, say in a big household, you'd be up pretty early as well.
Just one thing, Chris, with all your ingredients, was there any that you had which was so bizarre when you bought them, or people looked at you weirdly, or you struggled getting? Was there anything sort of like pheasant's eyes or something like that?
There's a lot of offal that appears in the menus, and so it was quite difficult getting hold of caul. I don't really know what caul is. It's like this kind of lacy membrane that goes around. I think it's around the stomach, and it's usually pig's caul that you get. And if you've ever eaten faggots,
love them.
Yeah, that they're wrapped in them, and then the fat almost dissolves on it. So it's like a fatty, lacy membrane, and it really keeps like meatball things really moist. And basically, there is a kind of faggot meatball recipe in Richard II's, and it requires you to wrap them in caul, and then these they sit inside a little pastry case, and then you pour an egg sauce in, and that's how.
So where would you actually source that from?
I have to source these things online. I don't have I haven't located a local butcher that would regularly sell that, but there are, basically I've ended up finding some really, really good quality stuff as well. It tends to be often linked to organic or free range farming that you'll find these things. And so it does mean you're off, because the delivery charge is usually quite high, and you don't want to just spend more on your delivery charge than on your whatever you're buying, so you end up having to buy quite a lot to cover that, and it does cost quite a bit really doing this sort of cooking in a way. But I think that's the most. I'm trying to think if there's anything weirder than that. I suppose the other thing is
there's a weird one. Ian Fleming says sow's udder is a difficult product to find and cook.
Sow's udder, yeah. I think I've never seen that.
We eat stuff like that all the time. When you were in Manchester, you must have had stuff like that up there all the time. Up north, we eat all things.
I'm in Manchester now. It's like.
Are you in? Whereabouts in Manchester? What area?
It's in North Manchester, so I'm near Radcliffe. So that's Radcliffe Bury way that way, sort of just on the edges of Radcliffe, going out towards Bolton or to the border with Bolton. So
know it well. I'm in Congleton, not far south.
Right. All right. Okay. Right. Yeah. You're in Cheshire, are you?
Yes, I'm one of the Cheshire South.
Oh, right. Nice Congleton. Yeah, it's lovely.
Quaint,
I was
peculiar.
going to say, another really difficult thing to get hold of that's not necessarily weird was a spice called cinnamon buds. I mean, everyone knows what cinnamon is, but cinnamon buds are used in medieval cuisine at this time, and they are from the same tree, and they look like cloves. If you know what cloves look like,
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to describe, but when you bite into them, they have a cinnamon flavour, but they're like little sweeties. They've got this really nice sweetness about them, and they grind them up and use them in various things. And I couldn't get hold of them in Britain, but I managed to get some from an Austrian supplier, and they're the best thing I've ever found. I think a really favourite thing of mine.
Do you know, there's a lot of people chatting in the chat room, just making things up. As you do, like where's that one?
Did they eat hedgehogs?
Pigeon stew and rabbit entrail kebabs and stuff like that. But
pigeon stew, definitely. Yeah.
Did medieval people eat hedgehogs?
I've not seen a recipe for real hedgehogs. There is a recipe that has hedgehog in the name, but it's actually one of these sort of like fake dishes where they made the dish to sort of resemble a hedgehog. So it's just basically minced pork with pastry spines in it.
Probably.
And so
what about badger?
Sorry?
Badger.
Badger. I've not seen a recipe for that. I mean, I bet people did eat
show joke. That's a show joke. That Adrian scared the badgers.
Right.
There's a couple of others. Barn owls cooked in their own tears, grated puffin, seal crackling, barbecued pigeon breast in puccour. There you go.
Well, I tell
apparently there's quite a lot of meat in badger as well.
If you think they're strange, there are recipes that have things like larks and blackbirds and all your little garden birds and storks and that kind of thing, herons, swans, obviously, that kind of stuff. So I mean, I think catching larks and eating those is pretty weird. Not quite the same as grated puffin, but yeah, it's almost up there.
Going back to
lark spit. No, what was that? What's the thing from Monty Python? Lark's vomit, isn't it?
Lark's vomit. Yeah. Well, that sounds nice. The going back to hedgehogs, Romany used to eat hedgehogs.
Right.
Travellers, and I've actually he's passed away now. I spoke to a guy who he was Italian, and his family used to eat hedgehogs. They used to kill them and then roll them in clay and then cook them in an open fire. And he said they were delicious.
Really I just imagine it.
Because all the spikes burn off. Right. Yeah, he'd eaten seagull as well.
You're giving him really bad ideas now. Some of his videos are just going to be a bit. Rob Random says 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Dave's favourite.
Well, actually, there is something a bit like that in Richard's cookery book. There is a pie which has. How does it say it in Middle English? I think it's smalaberdis. So it has little birds in it and
small birdies.
Yeah, and I think it's got a pork filling, and then they stick the birds. I think though it's an open pie, so you see the blackbirds or whatever, or your larks straight away. You don't have to take the pie off for them to fly out. And
so they weren't one for aesthetics.
Well, depends, doesn't it?
My favourite one is Gareth Howard. Budgies tongues on little cocktail sticks at Christmas. It's just so bizarre.
There's one. Yeah, go on, read that out, Adrian.
The Catash Inn in North Cadbury had badger at Christmas in 1700s.
Oh, there you go. Well, that's not medieval, but
no.
Where was the Catash Inn then?
North Cadbury.
It's Cadbury. Okay, where's Cadbury? That's down in
Birmingham.
Birmingham way, isn't it? Yeah.
Make chocolate there.
Have you got the reference, please, Julie Darch? That's what I want to know. I want to know this is factual and not just.
Yeah, because badger would be quite nice. I would have thought. A lot of meat. It's it's the size of a dog, isn't it?
Cadbury's actually Yeovil. The Catash Inn.
Okay.
It's
Somerset then. Yeah.
We can talk about food all night.
We could,
but more importantly, just quickly, alcohol. Have you experimented with brewing mead or?
I don't really like mead, to be honest. I've drank mead several times. It's not worth the effort. Really.
I've got several bottles. I love it.
I know people keep buying it because I'm a medievalist. It's bad to like mead. Sorry, Paul and Di. I think you bought me that last one. Apologies, but I'll come up with some kind of recipe where it's used. Although I don't think there is a recipe with mead in. I'll have to go back a bit and dig out something.
Joe, Christmas time, Christopher, I was drinking sparkling mead, and it was absolutely. It was obviously less fermented and it had the fizz in it, and it was so smooth. It was absolutely gorgeous.
It's not that I think it's really disgusting. I suppose the problem is the first time I tried it was quite a few years ago at a medieval conference, and it was kind of served at room temperature, and it needed to be a bit cooler, I think.
Good question.
I like honey. So. Well, okay.
Live stream investigator. Did they eat insects or use them as ingredients? A lot of countries do abroad. That's interesting.
That's the most sensible thing Rob's ever said.
Yeah.
Ever. Well done, Rob.
That's a good question.
Proud
actually.
of you. Very
nothing springs to mind immediately in this context of the cookery collections I've seen. I wouldn't be surprised if they appear in medical recipes. In some form or other. In fact, they must do. In fact, so probably if I were to look at some Anglo-Saxon medical recipes, they're the sort of oldest ones we have from England. So you can go back to the 9th, 10th century, and they may well have some insects used in some way. But you haven't got like ants being sprinkled on top of your, your roast swan or whatever. The nearest thing you really get is saying that, of course, they eat a lot of honey, which is a product of insects. But I don't know. I can't think of anything, but I wouldn't categorically rule it out.
When was swan legal? When was it not legal to eat swan?
I think there was an official law. I think it doesn't come out till... I can't remember which century it is, but it is the medieval period. I think it might be 15th century. But even before then, it was still something that traditionally belonged to either royalty or to nobility. So you wouldn't be... there were restrictions on hunting anyway, really, that the king could do what he wanted in terms of hunting, whereas normal people were not allowed to do it. They'd be poaching. But I can't remember exactly. There are a number of swan recipes. The thing is with swan, basically, it was roasted, and so they'd roast it in front of a spit. It'd be on a spit, and it'd be roasted in front of the fire, and then they'd serve it with a sauce. And they used to serve a sauce called Chaundon, which was made of the innards and blood of the swan. So it's like a black sauce. He's really squeamish, isn't he?
No,
Adrian, can I just point something out? Right, all the fanar stuff me and you do constantly, all the time, every week, and he's just beat us by miles.
I know, juices, moist, everything was in there. Yeah.
Spit roast, it's all in there.
Yeah. I've always
we're nothing now, are we? We should be. No. We may as well go. Leave him to it. He's just destroyed us.
I'd be interested in the chat who's eaten swan, because I know a couple of people who've eaten it, and one of them is a gamekeeper where it was caught in power lines and it was electrocuted and
break a man's arm.
Sorry.
Break a man's arm, swan.
Yeah, they can. Remember that as a kid. When you're a kid, get away from it; it'll break your arm.
Break your arm, yeah.
Adrian Mole books.
Yeah.
Listen, we spoke for most of the show now about cookery, but obviously, Christopher, there's so many other wide and varied things that you're a part of. One of the things that I piqued my interest, going back a little bit, there was a period of time that you were actually writing medieval fiction as well.
Was there?
I'm sure you were printing something like medieval monk period of time for.
Well, I suppose I suppose some of the blog posts that I wrote on medieval monk could definitely be described as fiction.
Yeah,
Because
that's what I mean. I was reading
kind
it as fiction.
Yeah, I took on the persona of an 11th century monk, sort of turn of the 10th, 11th century, and would write about stuff. So I'd be bringing in factual stuff, but I'd be trying to put it across in a humorous way. That kind of side of that blog has unfortunately kind of almost disappeared, which is a bit of a shame because I'd like to get back into it in some ways. And one of the things I used to enjoy doing was writing really bad art history from this medieval monk's perspective. So he'd be going through the Harley Psalter, which is fantastic for images for sort of everyday life, and I'd just be making comments about it, which were a bit silly, really. But in it, I would weave in, some stuff about the Psalms or whatever. So I suppose that is a kind of fiction. And I did. Now you mentioned, I did actually write a couple of audio plays where I performed all the parts, which were a bit saucy, in slightly saucy, I guess. And that was about there was a cowherd called Beowulf, and there was a milkmaid as well.
Adrian, he's destroying us. We've got nothing. We've gone. He's done saucy comedy.
Yeah, and there was a priest as well. So so there was a priest and the premise of it was that the milkmaid felt that she had to do some penance. And so she was trying to explain what her sin was without actually saying it, and the priest was trying to find through his penance books, flicking through the pages, trying to find out, is it this, is it that? So he'd be going through everything, and I can't quite remember how it ends. It ends up with her vomiting, I think. So that was a sin as well. So
one of your other specialist subjects, which I'm intrigued, is sex, marriage in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's how I started, really. I started with sex, and that's what I was known for in the kind of
Dr. Sex.
Yeah, in the academic community, because my PhD was about sex in the Anglo-Saxon period.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
was it?
They did have sex. Yeah.
Was it different, or was it deemed as? I'm trying to.
Not. I don't think so. Not really. No. I think there's some surprising details that sneak into different texts throughout the period, not just in English texts, but in European texts. So you've got, for example, probably the most outrageous thing is that there's some guy refers or alludes to dildos being used by nuns between themselves. So there is the mention of that. I mean, the word is...
Where was this?
I think this is... I forgot his name.
Got any pictures?
I think this was Heinkmar of Reims, I think, that wrote about it, if I've said his name correctly. And he talks about machines, is the word he uses in Latin, that they're using machines in an unnatural way. So he's heard, it's been reported to him, and there's probably some truth to it, because what was expected when confession was always important to an extent, but it developed more and more as the centuries went by. But we're talking about, I think, the 9th century at that time. So you'd be expected to fairly regularly go and see your priest and confess your sins, and he would, I suppose to put it bluntly, would try and winkle out of you what you'd been up to. And there's in the penitential texts that I dealt with were English ones, so there were the ones that were written in Old English, and one or two that were written in Latin, but they were from England, and a large proportion of them related to sexual sins. There wasn't just those; there's the obvious ones, murder and that kind of stuff. So my PhD was in part about looking at what these texts said about these particular sins, and trying to tease out the detail about attitudes. So you're obviously getting the church's attitude towards it, but you're also at the same time finding out, well, what were people doing that they had to confess? That kind of thing. And
imagine me and you having to go to confession, Adrian.
I go every day. Was there bestiality?
Bestiality? Yeah, there's in terms of like secular laws, so kingly laws, it's not mentioned, and neither is homosexuality mentioned. So there's no laws against homosexuality mentioned. There are laws about adultery and also about rape or taking hold of a nun and taking her off, carting her off, and having. I mean, it might mean rape, or it might mean she's actually agreed to it, but the words are sometimes difficult to fully understand. But in the kind of religious laws, that's where you get much more detail about sex, and that's why I was looking at them. And so you got a whole range of types of sin, from fornication, basic fornication between an unmarried couple, right through to bestiality, and different types of sex that was disapproved of. So oral sex and anal sex were disapproved of, and also obviously sex between men. And also, curiously, you get this introduction of a kind of, careful how I rephrase this, but a sort of type of person called a badling, who was viewed as kind of I suppose in modern terms we would say biologically male, but was living the life of potentially living the life of a different gender, or it wasn't the basic binary gender of male and female, and that so there's references to a badling having sex with another badling or with a man. So there's also the kind of condemnation of that, and that's quite unusual, and it is quite specific to these English penitential texts. So yeah, there's a whole range of it's very interesting. And
a question I was interested in, Gareth Howard's asked, were the bestiality laws in Wales slightly more relaxed in medieval times?
I shouldn't laugh, I should. I didn't look at Welsh ones.
There wasn't a law. There still isn't.
I'm trying to think whether they, it's kind of weird in a way, because the penitentials actually started in Ireland, and then the English took them up and developed them. So, but mostly initially they were just for monasteries. That's how they were, for just regulating monastic life. And then when you get into the English penitentials, it's for everybody. So it becomes broader. And the other thing, if you want to talk about, you did say, are there any pictures? Well, yes, there are pictures. There are medieval depictions or representations of sex in manuscripts from the early medieval period, so pre-conquest documents. So there's a Bible called the Old English Illustrated Hexateuch. So it's the first 6 books of the Old Testament, where there's always lots of sin going on there, including sort of sexual crimes and sins. So that gets translated into Old English, but it's illustrated, so it's like looking at a comic book in a sense. It looks quite like a modern day comic, and there are certain scenes from the Old Testament, like to do with Sarah, Abraham, and Sarah's. I don't know what you know about the Old Testament, but Sarah can't have children, so she hands over her handmaid and basically her slave to Abraham, so that Hagar, slave, can get pregnant, so that she in a sense becomes a surrogate mother for Abraham and Sarah. And this is actually represented in this Hexateuch book. And so it's actually the image that got me interested in doing it as a PhD, because it's really, on one level, quite moving, because you see on the left hand side you've got Sarah in her bed chamber. You've got the curtains hanging down, and on the right hand side in another bed you've got Abraham and Hagar tightly wrapped up in this sort of blanket thing, with their eyes open if you look very closely, and Sarah is actually peeking from behind the curtains to having a look at what's happening.
Cook it.
Oh, hello. Hello, he's lovely. Oh, isn't he beautiful?
Do you know, I was whistling him last week, and apparently my dog was going absolutely ballistic.
Oh,
I've
he's a
just got
collie, is he? Is he
a
a
border
collie?
collie, Welsh
Border
border collie. Yeah.
Oh, he's
So,
gorgeous.
Welsh. Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
Metal detecting Laura made a comment, Laura Wells, about what you just said regarding Sarah
Right.
Hagar, etc. Very much a case of what we now watch on TV,
Yeah.
A Handmaiden's Tale.
Well, it kind of that's kind of where it derives from. I haven't watched much of The Handmaid's Tale, though I did read the book a few years ago, and that's the part of the Old Testament I think that inspired the idea behind it, of putting somebody in your place. And obviously they take it quite literally, don't they, in the program and in the book.
Just got to put it out for a wee. Sorry, I'll be back in a minute.
Are you talking about the dog, mate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, she's absolutely right there. That's it's quite relevant then in that sense, and it was that image that made it kind of because I've always been somebody that responds to sort of learns visually and responds to visual imagery, and that's why I wanted to bring the visual side into the research, and that's all my stuff that I've published. Almost all of it's always got some element of visual media from the medieval period, and it was that one that got me thinking, there's this is something that needs to be brought out and discussed. And so there was lots of opportunities to do all sorts of things. Lot with his daughters, that's depicted him having sex with his daughters. There's nothing, it's not titillating, but it's there. It's not that particular example. Those particular examples are there. The only one that does get left out is the translator called Alfred wasn't very happy about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So he misses out the bit where the men of Sodom go and knock on or bang Lot's door down and demand, basically they want to gang rape him, essentially, really. So he misses it out. But the artist, he doesn't depict it, but when the Sodomites are shown, he codes their behavior. Oh, that was one of my arguments, and I did it in a book. I wrote a book about it, and so that's quite interesting in itself, that there's a kind of unspoken sin as well. The sin of sodomy is something that shouldn't be mentioned, kind of thing, but it is mentioned, and there are plenty of people that refer to it, and that's quite revealing as well. Because sometimes there was a famous book in the 20th century, I can't believe I've forgotten the title of it, but the author of that, I don't think he's alive anymore, made the claim that during the Anglo-Saxon period, the early medieval period, the attitudes towards misusing it sort of in a sort of out of period sense, but the attitude towards gay people was more lenient in the Anglo-Saxon period, and I just don't think it stands up to scrutiny. I don't think it's true. I think it was just as severe, or there was no acceptance of it, really. So that's quite interesting. Yeah.
In your work, you've mentioned about translating things. How difficult is it to? I mean, working on the one you mentioned at Rochester Cathedral, how difficult is it to actually understand? And I mean, that's something. It completely. I couldn't begin to understand how difficult that is.
It's. I actually find it difficult. It's not. I think there are, different academics, different scholars have got different strengths, and there are people that, there are people that can have a conversation in Old English, or medieval Latin if they wanted to. Well, I'm not one of those scholars, but I can translate, I can read and understand. But I get out of practice. So if I've not done something for 2 or 3 years, which I haven't done any translating of that particular book, and I'm going to be doing some this year, it'll take me a few days to get back into it again, to get back into the swing of it. In terms of Old English, I don't know whether anyone. It wasn't called Old English at the time; it's just what we call it now, because it's not a very adventurous term. But it used to be called Anglo-Saxon. Now it's called Old English. We still have quite a lot of the vocabulary in modern English. Okay, the spellings have shifted, but we still have some of those words. So if you had somebody reading out nice and steadily some Old English, depends what they're reading out. You would perhaps hear certain words that you'd recognise. Like you might hear the word father, mother, that kind of thing, God or good, depending on whether you mean good or God, it was spelt the same. So you'd be able to identify that. But what's so difficult about it from a modern English perspective is that the language back then it didn't depend on word order the way modern English does today. So in modern English, we have to say the cat sat on the mat. We can't switch mat and cat around because it would be the mat sat on the cat. But in Old English, you could do it because the endings on the words, on the nouns, would indicate whether it was a subject or an object of the sentence. So we call that an inflectional language. So they have inflections or endings so that it helps you grammatically. So technically, especially in poetry, you can mess the order of the words around a little bit more. I mean, you still have languages today that are highly inflectional. I mean, Latin's even worse for that, or even more complex. And then I think Greek's probably, I don't know any Greek, but I think has even more inflection. So it is difficult, but you get in what happens with the stuff that I was translating, especially when you're translating laws or charters, you start to pick up all the formulaic language. And a lot of charters that kings, they start off with very, 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 very flowery Latin sometimes. Some of Ethelred the Unready's charters, I translated a couple of those, and the Latin was really hard work, but you get used to it, and then you get to the sort of more formulaic parts of the charter, and they're quite fun. It's quite fun being able to read it from a manuscript. Once you get your eye in on the script and the way the letters are almost uniformly reproduced. And if you're looking at the book that they have in Rochester, the Book of Rochester, Texas References, most of the documents inside the book, they're like copies of older laws and so forth, they were reproduced by the same scribe. So it's just his hand that you're reading. And yeah, he's got quite a nice even hand that you can follow and get used to. So you can actually, I think, even if you're not an expert, you can teach yourself to read a script, recognize the letters. And if somebody explains how you pronounce those, you can start reading it first, and then you can start understanding it better once you can read it. But yeah, you do need to know what you're doing in terms of grammar and stuff. You can't just, well, you can have a bash at it, but but once you get to understand how the grammar works, which we just kind of do naturally when you speak in your mother tongue, you think you don't know grammar, but you do. But when you're learning another language, you have to get to the bottom of it so that you can accurately translate it. Mm. I think one of the fun things I've found about language is when I've worked with, last year I finished working with Clive Nolan, who's a prog rock musician, neo-prog rock, I think you'd probably call it. And he has a classical background, classical training as a composer. And he produced, he wanted to do this, well, he did. He went and produced this fabulous record, which was retelling the Beowulf story. Lots of monsters and Grendel and everything. And he had it as what he called a secular oratorio, which basically means he had people singing the main verses and he had a narrator, and then he had the choruses come in. And for the choruses, he wanted them all to be sung in Old English, in Anglo-Saxon. So he contacted me, and I had to translate his ideas into Old English lyrics, which was quite challenging, trying to get them to fit, because all the music was, and the rhythms and here we are. Look, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So there you go. And they are singing one of the songs, and so they're singing my words. I always find this it's quite a pleasure to look at them sing. I mean, it's quite hard to recognize the words, I think, in this song.
You can't hear that when I play it, can you?
No, I think if you turn your microphone off, will it?
I've no idea. I wouldn't know how to. Can't never get me back. But if you go on to the medievalmonk.com onto projects and publications, you'll be able to see that. But I think it sounds nice anyway.
It's fantastic. This is probably one of my favourite bits, and he put this out there as a sort of promo video, and basically all those people volunteered. It was right in the middle of the pandemic, so he couldn't get people to come into his. He couldn't get singers to come in, so he got people to send in, record themselves, and he brought it all together and multiplied their voices as well. And none of them knew Old English, so I had to explain through Clive how the words were pronounced. So what I did was kind of like I didn't do proper phonetics because that's too confusing, but I recorded myself singing very badly the words, and then I spelled out each individual word, how it should be, what it should sound like phonetically. And they actually get it they're very accurate. They do get there. They're not messing it up at all. So I was really pleased about that. And that was done when I was on holiday once in Florida. It's just bad timing in a sense. I'd have done it at home where I can do a better recording, but I was doing it on holiday on my phone inside the bathroom. So there's me singing really badly and it's echoing, and somehow that translates into that lovely rousing chorus about the dragon in Beowulf. So it's really good.
Your blog and stuff's quite interesting as well. I was reading that earlier. Oh, the games thing. Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
Your neighbours.
Some guy made that for me. I've forgotten his name. He's really good. He makes medieval clothing, and well, it cost me quite a bit because most of it was handmade, and the material is authentic, and it's based on an authentic. It's based on a manuscript or several manuscript illustrations of what monks' costumes looked like in the 10th and 11th century. And
did they wear pants?
Yes, that's what the long trousers are really, and they may have bound them as well. But you can see them on some of the manuscript images. You can see the long pants that they're wearing, and then they wore a sort of under tunic, which would have been probably of linen, and then the woolen one on the top. But the thing about Anglo-Saxon monks is there's no evidence that they had a separate cowl. The hood was part of the outfit. That's what you always see in earlier manuscript illuminations and drawings. That's what you see, and then it switches later on, where they have this sort of separate hood that comes onto the shoulders.
I'd love to put that on and put the washing out at like early in the morning.
Go for a walk down a local old church site.
Yeah, just wander around at night. Just actually, I had a great grandfather who was locked away. This is a long time back. It's in the family. There's some notes, family history. My brother was telling me, and when he was 15, he had a job working in a bakery, right. And he used to work early in the morning and stuff. And his first wage packet, he bought some material and covered himself in it near Epping Forest, and jumped out at people at night, scaring them. And I don't know where I get my tomfoolery from, but he was actually he was charged, and we've got the print of what it was done. He was fined like a week's wages or something. But yeah, I just love that story because was there going back to sort of sex in the Middle Ages. What was sort of how was it? Did you have to consummate the marriage then?
Yeah, you would be. You'd have to. Yeah, that's quite an interesting question, because the reason I say that is there's a law in one of the penitentials where a woman can divorce her husband if the marriage is not consummated. If he can't perform, then she's allowed to get rid of him and marry again. It's quite interesting that. Yeah. You're not, in a sense, you're not really married in the eyes of religion if you don't consummate the marriage. And there's also a very weird provision and tradition within the church at this time where people could mutually agree to separate and go into monastic institutions, the husband and the wife, and so in essence they'd be ending their marriage because they probably never see each other again either. So yeah, it's kind of
I did play a part in Kerry Fuller's Lost Tapes of History as a sex instructor. Just and I wasn't bringing that question up
where the part was actually written directly for you, by the way. Got to admit.
Yeah, there's a lot of double entendres in it.
Right.
But I did mention about consummating the marriage in there.
Yeah.
So, no, it's interesting.
Yeah, they did. I mean, also, I think it's quite interesting. I can't quite remember the ages now, but there's some, because it's a while ago since I did all this now. It's probably more than 10 years ago, and I haven't got a great memory. But there are some ages of when that suggest when you are free to marry. They're not actually as young as you think. 15 comes to mind in one context, and that might have been referring to girls. It might have been a bit older for boys. So, you get later on in the, like Richard II. His second marriage was to a girl that she was about 7 or 8 or something, but the marriage wasn't consummated. I don't think there's any indication that. I mean, it was completely a political marriage, although there seemed to be, kind of a fondness for her, like as if she was his daughter, really. I don't know what would have happened had he, when she become of age, as it were, whether, they would have consummated it. I suppose they would have done. But that wasn't really something that really happened, I don't think, in the early medieval period.
What was this sort of? What was deemed if a 50-year-old man married a 15-year-old? Was that deemed acceptable or unacceptable?
There's no documentation to. That's quite a specific case, isn't it? Really, I can't think of anything obvious.
Shouldn't have said that question, really, because I'm 50.
No, I can't. I don't. It's a bit hard to say, really, because you've got laws and you've got religious laws, and then you have custom as well, and sometimes they intersect and there might be conflict, which you see, for example, in things like how a fair number of Anglo-Saxon kings end up practicing polygyny, where they've got 2 wives. And it wasn't really something that the church liked, but it kind of tolerated it to an extent, really. Although there's a secular law that one of Canute's laws refers to it, and I think, which is kind of ironic, because Canute did have 2 wives, and it was supposedly his law, but it was written by the Archbishop Wulfstan of York, and in there he I think it's quite explicit in forbidding polygyny. Marrying 2 wives. There's the kind of thing that in the penitentiaries you get this thing that you've got to put one of them away. It's one or the other. Get on with it. But whether in practice, when it comes to custom and tradition, there's a long tradition of men having more than one wife in early medieval culture. So.
One thing I wanted to touch upon before we go, something that's attracted me to learn more. We know of Grendel being a medieval monster, and you mentioned on your website about medieval monsters. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the first time I did anything to do with medieval monsters was to do with there's a text called The Wonders of the East. It's an Anglo-Saxon text written in Old English, and there's also a Latin version of it. But it derives from Greek texts, or the stories derive from Greece ultimately, and maybe even perhaps some of it back to India. And in the medieval English text, they're illustrated. So these texts have got drawings of all the monsters. And it's a story about, it's not really a proper narrative. It's about if you travel to this land or this island, you'll come across this wonder, as it were. And I suppose we tend to call them monsters. Whether they would necessarily use that word is, it's something I suppose we're putting onto it. But some of them are quite monstrous. Then others of them are just strange forms of human, really. And I published, that's probably one of the first things I published, was an article in Anglo-Saxon England Journal And I was actually still doing my PhD at the time, so I was quite pleased to get something published. And it was I was basically explaining that the belief that they had back then was that all these kind of monstrous births, which they did believe in them, even if they didn't see them, because clearly these types of people didn't exist, or most of them didn't. And they felt it all came from Cain, as in Adam's son. So they referred to these people as the sort of offspring of Cain. And as a result of his sin, all these strange births appear. And so it's, in a sense, when people thought about these monsters and these monstrous human hybrids, as it were, they're kind of seeing themselves as well. That was loosely speaking what I was trying to say, that when medieval people engaged with an image, they probably engaged with it far more intimately than we would. Something, we're so saturated with so much imagery, and so pictures or drawings can sometimes seem quite flat and boring. But to a medieval person, they would be engaging with that monster, and so they're almost stepping into the picture, and the monster's coming out to them. And there is even an image of a particular monster that's got its face in its chest. He's got no head, and he's gripping the frame of the drawing and about to step out of the page. And so there's this, I was trying to say that there's this kind of awareness and fear that really, as humans, monsters were not that different, really. We all come from the same, we all go back to the same origin. And that was a belief that they held. And I think definitely they did, they did. I think there is another text called Liber Monstrorum, which suggests that some of the monsters are just too ridiculous to believe in, but not all of them came in that category. And also they ended up sticking I think it's the very first monster, as it were, is actually a I suppose what we would call today perhaps a transgendered person, we could say. And that's they label that as the first monster, and that this is quite common, it's been experienced. So monster / wonder, but not it's, the context isn't very good. They're kind of saying that they're sort of being deceptive, living their life as as the opposite of what they are. So it's quite interesting how the attitude that was there.
Before we go, Dave, we must mention Chris's website and YouTube channel. And
You certainly should.
yeah, just in case, because I'm going to.
There's
Can you
website at the bottom of the screen anyway.
Yeah, so I've got the Medieval Monk, right? That's my one that goes back quite a few years, and then the newer one is Monk's Modern Medieval Cuisine, and that does all the stuff on the food. Monk's Modern Medieval Cuisine, and that's what the YouTube channel's called as well, Monk's Modern Medieval Cuisine.
Can you recommend any dishes? Oh, that looks nice. Salmon and fig. Oh, now that sounds nice. Oh,
you've got
chicken in spiced parsley.
Yeah, that's very nice. There's quite a few things that some of these are not that easy to do. There's some technical skill required, but some of them are straightforward. So you've got one there, pears in ginger syrup, which is, we still make a version of that today, though we tend to use cinnamon now. But so that goes back, a long way. And that one there, where it says medieval Christmas pastries, that's I'm arguing is the oldest forerunner to the mince pie. These little square things. So they're definitely worth.
And a lot of them gluten-free.
Well, I have to do them gluten-free because I'm gluten intolerant. So I initially started telling people how to make the pastry, how the medievals would have made it. But most of the time they didn't make gluten-free pastry. Having said that, there is one there, that little one there with the pine nuts, the pine nut tarts. That actually is the medieval recipe is gluten-free because they use chestnut flour to make the pastry. I actually halved it with, did a 50-50 with rice flour because I found chestnut flour pastry very heavy, a bit too cardboardy, but it worked with half. I mean, rice flour is a medieval ingredient, so I thought I'll use half.
And some of these easy to do for a complete novice? Are some of them quite easy?
None of them are really difficult. Some of them are quite long recipes. I think probably the pears is very easy. There's the breakfast one. I don't think that looks more difficult than it is, but it's not. The one that's kind of stripy, green and gold coloured. It's a curd that's fried. I think that's good fun. If you want to make curds, which is basically simple cheese, and then you fry it, that's quite good.
I'm very much attracted to the medieval cheesecake tart.
That's nice. Yeah, very nice. It is good. Yeah, that's. I mean, if you don't have to make the medieval pastry. And in that, I just do a modern gluten-free short crust. I mean, the thing is about medieval pastry, to put it bluntly, most of it was rubbish. They didn't know, they couldn't make a decent pastry because they hadn't discovered that butter is what you should put in pastry, or butter and lard. So for a long time, they weren't putting fats into pastry, other than sometimes they would occasionally make pastry with egg yolks or whole eggs, and that's half decent, that pastry. But their basic pastry, which is flour and water, is pretty much, it's pretty cardboardy. And then as the centuries go by, they discovered that butter works and everything. So what I do when I'm making my pastries is I'll point it out. Look, I'm going to use a modern pastry. Excuse me, because I like to eat the whole thing. I don't want to chuck the pastry away, which sometimes they didn't. Probably in elite circles, they didn't necessarily eat the pastry. It was just used to cook the filling and then. Or to enclose something like a piece of venison, and then they'd take the pastry away and they'd eat the venison. But sometimes they were meant to eat the pastry, some of the nicer egg pastries and things like that. But yeah, that's a nice one, the cheesecake. And if you don't like the idea of using elderflowers, which you can't anyway, I suggest that you can. I do offer some cheats here and there. So I say just use some elderflower liqueur, some elderflower booze instead. And that actually boosts the elderflower taste anyway. So. Yeah, and hopefully this year I'm going to be trying to do sort of one a month on a video, and then I'll be doing other recipes on the blog as well. And so you should see in a couple of weeks my posh gruel that's coming up. And as I say, I'm going to be posting a blog about it's called Pan Ragoon, which I explain. I put forward an idea of what it actually means, because nobody seems to know what ragoon means, and I think I've discovered its meaning. And so it sounds like it's pan meaning bread, sort of the French Anglo-Norman word, and ragoon means something specific, I think, and that's this lovely toffee brittle with pine nuts in, and that's, I think, is really easy to make, because as long as it perhaps helps to have a sugar thermometer, but you don't need one, because the medieval recipe tells you how to test when the sugar and the honey is ready, so that you know when to add the pine nuts, and then you roll it out, or you pad it out on a table and you cut it into slices.
You should write a book, cookery.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
You should make a BBC 3 TV series.
Well, that's right. Tell everybody about it. That's what I'd really would like to do. The series I would like to make is me challenging established chefs to make something medieval, and maybe to give it a modern twist, but they're not allowed to use they're not allowed to use things like potatoes or tomatoes that weren't around, but they can give it a twist. I just like to see what they can come up with, so they can have I'll give them the recipe and the translation. I can give them a few tips, but then I'd like to see what they come up with. So I was thinking
it'd be like the great medieval British Bake Off.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So I might
just showing that.
Yeah, if I can get around to it, I might try and do a couple of those. I've got a couple of chefs that have agreed to do it. That they're professionally trained, but it's about whether we can get it filmed and how good it looks.
Not easy, is it?
I'll hook you up with someone.
Do.
I certainly will. If you're watching, Cashy, here, Cash TV Productions, and he's in Wigan, so it's not far.
There you go.
And there's that other company, Dave, who
Even Load
Films. Yeah.
Yes.
Even Load. I'll write that down. Is that as in EVEN?
Yeah, LODE. LODE. they mentioned me and Dave. They're trying to do a movie on our show, and they keep contacting us, but we don't want to go to Hollywood, do we, Dave?
Not again.
No, especially like with COVID and that. So they've offered us like millions, but
I've just invited you to their Facebook page.
Okay. I'll be honest. I'm not that bothered about being in front of the camera. I don't mind doing the voiceover. I get quite stressed whenever there's a script to follow, and I do script the videos.
How do you think we feel every week with this show? It's so scripted. It's, we have so much trouble, don't we, Adrian?
I mean, I've just got the producer in my ear. He's telling me not to slate the show. But yeah, I mean, we got all the team behind us, all the technicians and everything. So yeah,
cameraman.
I bet
you find it the same. The moment that you have to say something in a particular way and it's scripted, you forget it, even though you practice it, and you know what it is. And it's I'm getting worse at that.
I've got a list there of things to mention tonight, and I've not mentioned any of them.
The way me and Dave do it, and like I've said to people before, is we just imagine we're down the pub with some friends.
Yeah, it works like that, and I quite like that aspect of it. That's quite, if you're sort of just speaking off the cuff, or you've got the ideas there, but you're just trying to. But when it comes to, so what I'm trying to do with my videos is make them less and less where there's scripted bits, and employ the voiceover more, because I like doing voiceover, and I've done a bit of voiceover. Well, I've done a fair bit of voiceover work in my heritage work, so that's something I enjoy doing. But yeah.
Well, listen, Christopher, it's been absolutely fascinating to speak to you tonight. As I said at the start of the show, I've learned a hell of a lot. Adrian will be Googling the sexy images later, and I'll be cooking.
Old English illustrated hexateuch. There you go for the sex images.
What's it called? Because I can colour him in. I've got felt tips galore. What's it called? Old English
illustrated hexateuch. So that's HEXATEUCH. Hexateuch. It just means the first six books of the Bible. It's on the British Library website. They've got it. It's all fully digitized.
He's already got it download now.
You can flick the pages, and you can try. You can look for anything. I mean,
that's the sort of thing I want to leave in my search history at work. And my boss comes along and he looks at it. He says, "What's hexateuch?" Oh, yeah. And then print a couple off on the printer at work and just leave them there. No, it weren't me. Yeah,
excuse me.
I'm going to look that up. No, thanks very much, Chris.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And if you're willing, we'd love to have you back in a future episode of the show.
Yeah, I'll have to do some kind of food experiment or something. Or probably, I probably won't be able to show myself cooking things, but I could always eat some things in front of you, couldn't I? Say,
Adrian, why don't we take on his challenge? He gives us a recipe. We film it.
Absolutely.
Trying to make something.
Yeah.
I'll do that, 100%.
I'll send you the one where you sew a cockerel up to a pig. How about that one?
That's
hybrid.
Pork scratchings I quite like.
Right, I'll give you something easy and see what it looks like. And
yeah, I'm up for that. That'd be quite
I'll
good.
Send you the recipe and some guidelines. Yeah, it can
Fantastic.
be dead simple if you want something like really like with just a little simple stew or a soup, or you can do something sweet if you want to have a go.
We'll leave it entirely to you. I'm sure you've sussed us out a little bit this evening.
Yeah,
he doesn't like anything with offal in, does he? And nothing with caul or that. No.
Swan's blood.
No swan's blood.
Oh God!
I'll see whether the local butchers started doing larks, and I can send you a couple of larks.
I could catch them and I'd eat them. I'd eat sparrows and blackbirds. That wouldn't bother me. It's just bony, isn't it? But then I suppose the bones would break and you crunch them. I don't know. Yeah, that doesn't bother me. Or hedgehog. I'd eat hedgehog. Wouldn't eat seagull because they live off kebabs and vomit on a Saturday night. So, but yeah, anything else I would eat.
Okay.
No, they do
Well,
though, Dave, don't they?
Sometimes.
They live off flake 99s and vomit and kebabs. That's all
It
seagulls
sounds
as
like
well.
I'm a seagull then.
Yeah. I'm going to call you that from now on. Seagull Dave.
Right. Christopher, again, thank you very much for joining us tonight on behalf of all the viewers, the listeners on the podcast
Good. Yeah,
version.
lovely.
And myself and Adrian. Don't forget, get yourself along to the medievalmonk.com or visit his, I've lost it now. I had it up and I've
Monk's
lost
Modern Medieval Cuisine.
Monk's Medieval Cuisine.
Modern Medieval Cuisine.
Modern Medieval Cuisine. So get yourself over there to, as I say, this. I'll be watching them. I've watched quite a few before, but there's some I haven't. So. Right, we'll be back next week. Adrian, the guest of next week is, I can't pronounce his name.
Von something.
Ulrich von Liechtenstein.
No, he's
Isn't the producer telling you? You know, you should be passing on.
He's a metal detectorist.
It's Alexander von Westenholz.
Yes. His YouTube channel is Metal Detecting UK Finds, and he's also got another one which is Holes, Hammers, Sagas. And he's got an XP Deus Light. He's had it for about 6 years, and he knows it inside out. And he's got some fantastic finds that he's had from Wales, North Wales.
And he's a well-known auctioneer, taxidermist, collector.
Yeah. Hey, there's a crossover there, isn't there?
Honestly, such an interesting gent. And probably one of the best spoken people I've seen on YouTube ever.
Yeah, it's just interesting, and he's very good at filming it, and he's very good at identifying his finds and stuff like that. It's just a nice. It reminds me of watching television, which is like YouTube anyway. But
and the following week, Christopher, you'll like this. Sick to Death, which is an exhibition in Chester, related to all sort of medieval Roman maladies and such like illnesses.
I'll tune in.
Like one of these places that you go into in York. It's pretty new in Chester. It's called Sick to Death. So I've got to go to Chester to pay a visit anyway. I'm from Ellesmere Port originally, so I'll have to pay a visit to that. Right, everybody, it's been a brilliant night. Thank you all as ever for joining in, and to Christopher for joining them. To Adrian as ever, and to Luke, who's not able to join us tonight, but I know he'll be listening in the morning. So take care, everyone. Have a great week from us all here at The Big Detecting Show.
Seagull.
Roger.